This has been an ongoing effort over the last few years with a number of individuals, and we have finally reached a finalized version of this land acknowledgement with the assistance of Elder and Vice Chairwoman Jessie Littledoe Baird of the Wampanoag Nation. MIT Land Acknowledgement. MIT acknowledges Indigenous peoples as the traditional stewards of the land and the enduring relationship that exists between them and their traditional territories. The land on which we sit is the traditional unceded territory of the Wampanoag Nation. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced occupation of their territory, and we honor and respect the many diverse Indigenous peoples connected to this land on which we gather from time immemorial. So again, Waliwan to all those who have been instrumental in creating that meaningful and appropriate land acknowledgement. I also have a number of personal acknowledgements that I would like to make. Waliwan to the generations who prayed for this day and this step taken to create a better future. Waliwan to Dr. MLK for his tireless work and commitment for a promised day of deliverance from injustice. Waliwan to those who have supported my attendance at MIT through the Institute Community and Equity Office, Native American Student Association, and the American Indian Science and Engineering Society. Waliwan to my faculty host, Professor Paradis, of the Comparative Media Studies and Writing Department at MIT. Waliwan to my staff advisor, Nancy Dalrymple, for her encouragement and support. Waliwan to those from Wabanaki communities who have supported me and provided me with more than I can mention in terms of inspiration, love, and kindness. Last but not least, Waliwan to my children who always believe that mom can save the world. Sorry. And so I just thought it was fitting to share a quote. And this is from Dr. MLK. Okay, here we go. Make a career of humanity. Commit yourself to the noble struggle of equal rights. You will make a greater person of yourself, a greater nation of your country, and a finer world to live in. And as I say, that was Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Next slide, please. So for those of you that may not know, oftentimes within our communities, within our nations, we as Indigenous peoples follow what has often been called protocol. And so many Indigenous nations follow many levels of protocol, such as ceremonial protocol, spiritual protocol, language protocol, cultural protocol, community protocol, internation protocol, and interpersonal protocol. Acknowledging protocol, knowing protocol, and honoring protocol is an essential element to establishing respectful relationships. Relationship building on protocol is the culturally sensitive and appropriate way of demonstrating care and concern for well-being. And so I know in the scientific world, there are also many protocols, and it is essential to good science to follow those protocols. Similarly, in working with Indigenous nations and being in an Indigenous world, you also need to follow protocol. So I appreciate those who are learning and starting to really respect and understand what some of those protocols are. Next slide. So I plan to give you an overview of the work that I'll be addressing through the MLK program for 2020 into 21. Currently, I am a guest lecturer in a course called Transmedia Art, Extraction, and Environmental Justice, which is with the Comparative Media Studies and Writing Department, and that is with Professor James Paradis and lecturer Marisa John. And I must say that in regards to being a part of this course, it has been a wonderful opportunity so far to share my experience, not only as a person who has been involved in Indigenous environmental issues and environmental justice, but as well seeking ways to create better communication so that our messages and our concerns can be fully and meaningfully communicated. As well, I am contributing in an advisory capacity for NASA and ACES on work to progress the relationship with the Indigenous community at MIT. As many of you know, and as was noted in the introduction, MIT has acknowledged and announced that they are recognizing institute-wide Indigenous Peoples Day. This is a very important and symbolic gesture and move and step to take towards advancing and redressing historical injustices amongst Indigenous peoples, and in particular for those Indigenous students that are at MIT and looking and seeking to create better relationships. I am also going to be offering presentations to faculty and departments across MIT, of course, based on request and collaboration. I am also going to be co-managing a collaborative project titled Pack Basket Project with the University of Maine Wabanaki Center on their Wabanaki Youth in Science program that connects Native students to STEM through Indigenous knowledge systems. The project will enable a web-based access to learning modules for tribal educators and others that may be interested. Next slide, please. It's my overview continued. I'll also be supporting the work of the EPA Superfund with Northeastern tribal communities. I will be exploring and creating new collaborations across the MIT community. I will be providing feedback to ongoing processes at MIT for improved inclusion and diversity, and as well as assisting Wabanaki Indigenous nations as requested. Next slide, please. So, as some of you may have heard or have heard it noted, that there is redress needed. And this is in regards to the moral acts, which were in the 1860s, that created land-grant universities, or some have referred to as land-grab universities. As an overview, I will provide you some basic information. In 1862, 11 million acres from 250 tribal nations were put up for sale to benefit 52 land-grant colleges. MIT was one of them. The acreage was not from a gift, not from a sale, not from a trade, but by 160 violence-based land cessions. These were not public lands to be sold for a cause. These were lands belonging to tribal nations, and this was an act of genocide, for it was the forcible removal of Indigenous peoples from their lands that caused death and destruction to those peoples. Two journalists from High Country News, with the help of a remarkable cartographer and others, researched the Bureau of Land Management, tracking every piece of land taken and sold. It is important to note that Massachusetts bought 366,000 acres, which was land from various parts of the country. And it was the sale of these lands which then supported the creation and growth of UMass Amherst and MIT. And so I have included the link to that article for anyone who may want to take a look at it for yourself, of course, and to hopefully create further conversation out of what is needed for redressing this historical injustice. Next slide, please. Related to the idea of belonging and place, we know that given that space is a fundamental aspect to providing room for existence and value, it is imperative that MIT acknowledge and recognizes its role in benefiting from the genocide of Indigenous peoples for the sake of its establishment. MIT, as affirmed by President Rafe in his announcement of Indigenous Peoples Day, which is to be observed institute-wide, would take immediate steps to address the need for space for both NASA and ACES. However, space is yet to be identified. Space, as we know, provides conditioning and defines what we hold valuable. Space for Indigenous students at MIT would enable making space for balance. The balance needed is between Indigenous knowledge systems and Western knowledge systems. For true innovation and collaboration to occur, we need to adopt what is known as the two-wide seeing approach. This approach was co-developed by Dr. Elder Albert Marshall and his wife, Dr. Elder Mordina Marshall, and Dr. Bartlett from Cape Breton University in Canada. Next slide, please. To describe the two-wide seeing approach to redress systemic discrimination and racism, I will acknowledge the next few things, the next few characterizations of that approach, so that you may begin to understand what this approach entails. First, acknowledgement that there is a combined vision necessary to understand the plight of life today. Some holistic elders have noted that what happens to our relatives, the four-legged, the swimmers, the flyers, the crawlers, and those seen and unseen, will happen to them. Acknowledgement that what humans are doing to their surroundings is having a devastating and lasting impact to life. Acknowledgement that climate change does exist and that it is man-made. Acknowledgement that it is going to take a reconnecting of vision between two competing worldviews to fully understand where we are at and what needs to change, and thereby taking the best of both. The acknowledgement that climate change is not only about impacts to humans, but to all life, and that this is a story about life and death, and that there is great grief, sorrow, and anger in the telling of this story. Further, that we understand that as humans, we are but only one species of 8.6 million. Next slide, please. In the spirit of collaboration and in the spirit of two-wide seeing approach, I will be co-managing a collaborative project, so it's between MIT and the University of Maine Wabanaki Center regarding the Wabanaki Youth and Science Program. The Pack Basket Project will enable Indigenous youth to learn more about how WAYS is supporting Wabanaki students to embrace STEM fields, especially environmental science through culture and heritage. The official WAYS program, which began in 2012, is currently a collaboration between the University of Maine at Orono, the U.S. Forest Service, Wabanaki tribes, and Native American high school students across the state. it became a DDLP with the NSF that includes a grant in 2017 to expand the work from high school into post-secondary careers. In the last 3 years, WAYS has influenced 15% more Native students being admitted to the University of Maine in a STEM field. The project goals are to create and integrate curriculum that embraces traditional ecological knowledge and Western science as equal partners. Develop and implement protocols for an ongoing mentorship program for WAYS and STREAM engineering students. Develop a framework to bridge the gap between high school and college, and foster collaboration among community elders, cultural knowledge keepers, and University of Maine faculty in a model that could be transferred to other communities. And just to note that Dr. Darren Renko, who heads up this work along with Tish Carr, Dr. Darren actually gave us a presentation along with Dr. Albert at our Indigenous Peoples Day event forum. And so if you are looking for more information around that, you can refer back to those presentations. Next slide, please. Steps taken, steps to go. So far this year, an MLK Visiting Scholar Program candidate was accepted, which is me. And we also had a welcome ceremony for incoming Indigenous students at MIT with the host nation, the Wampanoag Nation. We had the first annual MIT Indigenous Peoples Day event, which occurred on October 12th. And we have some more steps to go. I did just want to note at this time that I am planning to offer bi-weekly discussion sessions in regards to 2 different topic areas, but interrelated. The first topic area will be Indigenous women and issues, and the second is around organizing and activism. Those sessions will start, I believe it is October 21st and 22nd, and through the ICEO office and with their help, I will be organizing the Zoom link for those sessions as a discussion forum and as a way to possibly promote some advocacy and some work in those areas. Further information will be available. So, looking forward to more steps to go. There was a list that was created and is going to be, I believe, given to the administration on behalf of MIT, NASA, and ACES students. But I did just want to, for the record's sake, and the ability to share this information widely, I wanted to share those recommendations with you here today. I think they are very important and they speak to many issues across the MIT community and ways in which people can help show their support and their care for Indigenous students at MIT. As we know, the MIT ICEO holds and displays the recommendations made by student groups presented at MIT during the 2010 to 2017 period. The 2015 recommendations of the Black Students Union and Black Graduate Student Association have received the most attention. The ICEO keeps a scorecard of what percentage of these recommendations made by these groups have been completed. However, they are not seeing passing scores. And there is provided here a link to that scorecard and to the recommendations. On behalf of NASA and ACES, we require a concrete statement of what we have been asking for the past several years. These recommendations will persist beyond our time at MIT. However, I hope that future Indigenous students, the faculty, and the administration can look at these recommendations and take note of how far MIT has come, or conversely, how little progress has been made. Next slide, please. So the 2020 MIT Native American Student Association recommendations. Number 1, acknowledge MIT's history with Indigenous people, including its role in racism, colonialism, assimilation, and issue a full and sincere apology for such acts. 2, acknowledge Wampanoag territory and create an institute-wide land acknowledgement, to which I have noted that this has been completed. 3, direct the funds from the Moral Acts of 1862 and 1890, which established MIT as a land-grant college with funds from stolen Indigenous land, towards the Indigenous students of MIT. 4, create a permanent, meaningful, and quality Indigenous student space, otherwise called an ethical space. Next slide, please. 5, address the requirements of restitution and reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, nations at MIT through management with funding, faculty with learning, staff with supporting, students with succeeding, facility with growing, and investors with greening. And so essentially, these 6 elements are meant to create much further conversations around how each one of these elements could be embraced throughout the Institute. And so the idea is that each one of these elements could apply to several different groupings of people who are interested in working towards these elements and these goals, as well as specific sectors within the Institute. 6, create an educational foundation to advance Indigenous scholarship. 7, create a center for advancing Indigenous-led development and perspectives in science. 8, create an archives and repository dedicated to Indigenous peoples' history and heritage. 9, dedicate residence space for Indigenous students that is culturally safe, welcoming, and affordable. Next slide, please. 10, create an elder in residence role and elders lodge space for continuous teaching and learning, support, and sharing. 11, foster respect and understanding of Indigenous sovereignty, nationhood, governance, and cultures throughout MIT. 12, undertake Indigenous-led cultural sensitivity and allyship training for all levels at MIT, from management to faculty and staff. 13, create and support Indigenous-led, land-based, place-based learning opportunities for all students on and off campus. 14, hire an Indigenous advisor or consultant to educate, oversee, and guide Indigenous aspects of MIT, or the social, moral, and technical aspects of MIT that impact its Indigenous students. 15, support and maintain an Indigenous alumni network and provide those alumni opportunities to give back to the Indigenous community at MIT. 16, promote Indigenous faculty to teach. 17, co-develop, support, and fund strategic partnerships and collaborations with tribes and tribal entities. Next slide, please. 18, support intervarsity Indigenous-led initiatives and events. 19, co-develop a recruitment and retention strategy for Indigenous students with the assistance of Indigenous students and tribal communities. and thereby do an environmental scan of the best practices that are currently being used. 20, revisit and update this list annually and evaluate progress based on Indigenous-led feedback. 21, create a balanced high-level committee, including president, provost, Indigenous student representatives, Indigenous alumni, and support staff to ensure these goals are achieved. It's important to have that final recommendation just so that, it is felt and that it is understood that we are all interested, we are all invested in seeing these recommendations and the Institute and all of our students be able to succeed in the most positive manner. Next slide, please. So we've gotten to the end of my brief overview of some of the work that I have already done and will continue to do during my year in the MLK Visiting Scholar Program at MIT. I really hope to reach out to many who are also interested in working on these types of initiatives. And I really appreciate that you have taken the time to listen and to be present for this presentation. Walewan.
Thank you. I'm very appreciative, Patricia, of your talk. Thank you so much. I direct the open courseware program at MIT. And I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about the Pack Basket project and how that might manifest itself in the MIT community, what we might be seeing, what opportunities, will show up for us here. Thank you.
For sure. Thank you for the question. And I know that Dr. Darren Ranko is actually in our session today. So Dr. Darren, if you want to chime in while I give my brief response, please feel free to do so. So the Pack Basket is actually a culturally significant and iconic symbol of Wabanagi culture. And the Pack Basket, for those of you who aren't familiar, is made out of the ash tree, and it's a handmade basket. And the reason why it's called a Pack Basket is because for those that packed it and put everything into a basket that was about this wide and about this high, and it has straps that you can actually carry it like a backpack, that you would put all of your essentials, so your food, your medicines, any kind of instruments or any kind of tools like for hunting and gathering that you might need, and you put that all into your basket. And what you're taking with you is essentially what is essential for your survival and for your journey. And so in that way, linking that to the work is to symbolize how we're going to pack our basket with all of the teachings and understandings and stories and concepts and a number of other elements that we may feel is very necessary for our survival and for a successful journey. And so for the program itself, they have broken this down into modules of teaching. And I really think that, for many at MIT, this could be very useful, not only in changing up the teaching paradigm, particularly because this really focuses on the land education, but as well the fact that it is meant for students to take responsibility to create those things. So it could be a tool, it could be, you know, their own drum or their own, whatever it is that they need to use while on their journey. And so it's as if, you know, we have resiliency in a basket that we're trying to promote. And so, you know, the aspect that I'm coming from, of course, is, you know, trying to blend the Indigenous knowledge system and the curriculum that has already been created at the University of Maine, but as well with the technical aspects of, you know, having a website, which is essentially going to provide this access to, you know, those who are utilizing that program, tribal educators, and really other educators, I think, that can truly benefit from this kind of innovative approach.
Patricia, it's Darren. That was a great description. I don't have much to add, except that it's, we've been working on our curriculum for 8 years, and we wanted we entered into a fairly loose partnership with MIT folks some 4 or 5 years ago to bring this to fruition, and as part of our interest in engagement and partnership with MIT. So it's a long-standing promise, and it does all the work that you mentioned, and I really appreciate you pushing it forward, and for MIT for working with us on it. Is to really bring our curriculum
Did we lose Dr. Darren? We may have.
It's all right. Bring our
there we
bring our curriculum to broader audiences. Anyway, that's it.
Wonderful.
Patricia, there are a couple of questions in the chat. So Mary Newton Lima, can you talk more about your work with Superfund?
Well, that is that's actually part of my work right now. That it is a very preliminary stage. I'm at the point of having, I guess, opening discussions around how I may be able to assist with some of the work that is happening within that work. And so, because of the fact that, you know, I am very familiar with the tribal communities that are involved with some of those EPA Superfund projects, I'm hoping to lend, you know, support and, you know, perhaps some knowledge translation and that type of thing to assist with also progressing where those projects at. And I actually saw Kathy Van Diver on here, but I'm not sure. She may have stepped away, but there is a number of elements that includes communication and education around initiatives, and really promoting the understanding of how tribal communities are being impacted by EPA Superfund work that I am particularly interested in. And so, like I say, I'm still at the beginning stages of working with that team, but I will definitely have you know, more information to share if you want to keep in touch and go from there.
Patricia, along the same lines, we have Rachel Gregor. She is in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering, and she'd love to hear more about your environmental work and activism and your thoughts on what kinds of actions we as a community or we as an environmental engineering department could take.
Excellent question. Thank you very much for that. I have been involved with tribal communities, First Nation communities, in particular around issues related to watershed. As noted at the outset of, you know, the talk, that our particular nation, our tribe, the Maliseet, were actually separated because of the borders. And so being able to do work together now on our Willistic watershed, we are called Willistic Way. The Willistic is beautiful and bountiful river in our language, and Willistic Way are people of the beautiful and bountiful river. And so I have been working for a number of years around watershed-based issues, and how that would intersect with engineering is that we have had a series of hydro development dams, which essentially have harnessed the power of the river for a lot of profit and benefit that is not in any way, profited or benefited our communities. And in fact, our salmon, our Outer Bay of Fundy Atlantic salmon, is beyond endangered. Actually, we have had no real, effective means of fish passage on our river, and so it has been a very difficult situation as our river was closed to fishing in 1997. And the effect of that, not being able to access our river for fishing, a food source, sustenance, that is, as healthy as fish is often, regarded, has meant, an increase in chronic disease for our communities. It has meant in, disintegration of natural concepts, cultural concepts of, fish life, fish cycles, passing on of traditional stories and language associated with fishing. So, it's been quite a journey of documenting and research into exactly how our people have been so negatively impacted, by that on and through our watershed. The other element that kind of interconnects me into the work I'm doing is my course, the course around extraction. And the fact that in our traditional territory here, we have the proposal for the world's largest molybdenum mine coming here to our territory. And so the potential tailings pond and the effect on our watershed vis-a-vis our tributaries is huge and dramatic. And even though the government has environmental assessment processes in place, and both at our federal and provincial level, they have both determined that this will create irreparable and irreversible harm to Maliseet people, culture, and communities. They are still pushing forward for that mine. So those are just some of the ways in which, I have been involved over the years. And actually, because of the dams and the situation with our Atlantic salmon, we created a transboundary summit, we call it. And it was Maliseet First Nations and the Maliseet tribe, the Holton Band of Maliseets in Maine. We came together and we requested that the government sit with us and discuss our issues. And essentially, we've been meeting now for the past 5 years through that summit process. And we have signed an interim statement of cooperation between the US government, the Canadian government, and our tribal First Nations governments. However, as far as progress goes, it is very slow. It is terribly much too slow. So when we're talking about issues like environmental justice, much like systemic justice, it is very difficult. These are tremendously weighty processes, the status quo, that have been in place for hundreds of years and really favor one system over another. And that is the work, I believe, through my work at MIT, that we can help all address these systemic and ongoing injustice issues.
Thank you so much, Patricia. And I just want to say that your children are right. You are changing the world. And I also want to acknowledge our students, Luke Baston and Alvin Harvey. You are changing the world. Thank you for honoring us with your presence, and thank you for letting us learn from you. Truly, you are our teachers. We're here to learn. So thank you, everyone. And I invite you to unmute yourselves and give a round of applause, or any way you want to recognize and thank Patricia, and also our Luke Baston and Alvin Harvey, our students. Really, Monday was just phenomenal. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.